Hello and welcome to Ask an Author with Julia Kelly. I'm really excited this month because we're doing something a little bit different. You'll have noticed if you're in the group that rather than doing a book club book, we are actually talking to my longtime agent and friend, Emily Sylvan Kim. Emily, hello and welcome.
Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm so glad to be here today.
So I'm really looking forward to this discussion because I think there is a lot that people wonder about when it comes to what a literary agent does and then how they work with authors. And then also just kind of talking about the business of publishing in general. I think readers are always curious about where books come from. And I know you've got a great long a great number of years behind you and experience that I know about because we're about to, in about 10-15 days, hit our 10-year anniversary.
Amazing.
Very exciting.
Mhm.
But when it comes to kind of the average reader, I don't think they have as much awareness of what it is that you're doing behind the scenes. So do you want to tell us a little bit first about prospect agency and you as an agent, what it is that an agent does?
Sure. Well, to start, I got into the agent profession right in the year 2000, right after the Y2K. So I had actually gone to law school for 1 year. And while I was at law school, I spent the whole time reading novels and thought maybe I should change professions. So I moved to New York without a job, got a job at a literary agency. I didn't even really know what a literary agency was, to be honest. I applied to jobs from the paper version of the New York Times that were in the publishing arena. And I got this job. And at the time, I was living in a really small apartment that looked like an office. And I got a job at a place called Writer's House that looked like a house. So it was pretty funny. I lived in an office and I worked in a house. And I was really lucky because I didn't know this when I got the job, but Writer's House is one of the premier literary agencies in the country. And I got thrown into this incredibly interesting and valuable experience for me, like this world where we're representing some of the biggest names in publishing, ranging from, the Babysitters Club to Nora Roberts and, Ken Follett, on and on and on. It's a lot of really interesting experiences. And I knew right from the beginning that this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So that was a good feeling because I think that is something that is an ongoing journey. And after just one or two false starts, I figured out what I wanted to do. And it's never regretted it, never been bored, always been keeping busy ever since. So I worked at Writer's House for about 5 years and then 5.5 years. And then at the birth of my first child, I decided to start my own agency and that my child is about to go to college now. So I've been working at and for Prospect Agency for 17 years.
It is
And
it is really, really wonderful listening to you talk about sort of the long progression of your career, because actually one of the reasons that I signed with you is that you had this very long view of what my career would look like. And I was unpublished at the time. I was just sending off manuscripts to agents who I liked the sound of, and I liked what they talked about on their website, if they had a website, because that's how long ago this was. Not everybody had a website when it came to agents. Not all of them had email submissions either. And one of the views that I was really impressed with was you. We could talk a little bit more about sort of the call, as people call it, when you called me and said, would you like to be my client and for me to represent you? But one of the things that you said was, I really love the book you sent me. What do you want to do long term? And I thought, that's a good sign. That's a very good sign. So as you say, sometimes it takes a while and a few different paths to figure out what it is that you're going to end up doing. But good thing you figured out in law school that you didn't want to be a lawyer before you went through the whole thing and became a lawyer and then
Yes.
to do a big career change.
Yes, that is a huge relief to me. I remember one of my friends said to me at the time, like, you don't seem to like law school. Why don't you drop out? And I was like, what a wonderful idea. And I think that's like the best advice I could give to any young person is like, if you don't feel like you're on the right path, like you're not committed, you're not proving anything to anyone, like your life is your own and you should try to figure out what you want to do with it.
Well, it's certainly advice that you've seen me through with also. So
I'm saying the same with writing. If you're writing a book and it doesn't feel like the right book, then you have to put the book aside, and that's one thing I've always been really impressed with you, Julia, is that I think one thing I've learned is that to have a successful writing career, you can't be too fixated on any one project because it is a lot of ups and a lot of downs and a lot of emotions. And I think you just have to say, like, I'm doing this because this is what I love to do
Yeah.
more than anything else.
Yeah, exactly. I often will tell people who are aspiring authors, the sweet spot is you are doing something you love that is also commercially viable. And those are not necessarily always the same thing. You know, having a publisher, if that's the route that you want to go down, having a publisher who wants to buy your book and distribute your book can sometimes be a very different thing than writing, you know, the book of your heart. And it's a wonderful thing when those two things come together in a really beautiful way. But it doesn't always happen. So some flexibility, I think, can be really helpful.
And you never know what the book of your heart is. Like, you might think the one you're writing is, but then, you know, you might put that one aside and realize there was an element of that book that you really wanted to convey, but it might come out better with different characters, different setting, different story, you know?
Exactly. So getting back to the basics for a moment, what is it when people say, what do you do as a literary agent? How do you kind of approach that topic? Because I think that's a really big question to answer.
Well, when someone asked me, like, I was just at the doctor and she's like, what do you do? Are you a publisher? And I'm like, actually, I'm more like a real estate agent for books, but that's not really
the way of putting it.
That's the way I describe it to someone who doesn't really care, you know, because that's not really an accurate description of what I do. Because I feel like the difference between me and a real estate agent is that a real estate agent sells the book and then sells the house and then they pretty much walk away.
Right.
Know? And so a literary agent sells the book and very much stays on. In fact, absolutely. I would say that if you have a deal in hand and you think you don't need an agent, you definitely do, because the agent does much more once the book contract is signed, or a good agent should anyway.
Yes. And in fact, that's something that I have very strong feelings about this, which is, you know, with the caveat that, you know, some people have very specialized knowledge. So I know some people who've worked in contracts departments for publishers and they, you know, they have their own feelings about going it on their own. But for somebody like me, especially who doesn't have a background in publishing, doesn't have a background in law, doesn't have a background in all of these things that are really helpful, and also just doesn't have as much of an ear to the ground in the industry about what is best practice, it's really amazing having somebody advocating for me. And then on top of that, and we can talk a little bit about sort of the relationship between an agent, an author, and an editor as well. But it's really wonderful having you there for negotiations and conversations, and even small things like, I really don't like this cover, or, you know, I have this big life event coming up and I need to broach this topic for my publisher because I think that the schedule we're on is not going to work. Being able to have somebody in your corner having those conversations is really, really valuable as an author. At least I feel that way.
Yeah, I do feel like, I mean, obviously one of my most important jobs is the contract and thus paying out like any monies that come in. That is like my fundamental job. But I feel like that, you know, I can see how someone could think they could handle that on their own. But it's the rest of the stuff that you just can't. That I think it's worth it to have the agent aboard for relationship building, like you said, just somebody who spends their entire day trying to figure out what's happening in the book publishing industry on behalf of their clients.
It's changing so quickly all the time. And I think, does it feel like it's changing more quickly than when you first started out in your career?
Not really. I feel like I just think about this time I went to a ebook conference with one of my colleagues when I was at Writer's House, and the whole thing was just so chintzy, and they had all these like e-readers and everybody was like, I don't think so. Like that must have been like 2002 or 3 at the latest. And everybody was extremely skeptical that this would ever.
You're still side loading your e-readers and all of that. It's PDF documents and
no. We're like, this is never going to take off. No. But then that was a really big change. And now I feel like, you know, there's just been some genres that have been kind of completely transformed, like romance, you know, but in general, I feel like the book industry is still more or less what it has always been, you know, and there's still a steady readership. So I think the pandemic has proven that, you know, book sales are strong and people are still really interested in reading, which is a huge relief.
Yes, no, there were a few very worrying months there when it was very difficult to get any fulfillment from places like Barnes & Noble and Amazon at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think everybody in the industry was just waiting to see what would happen. And it turns out that people sort of fell back in love with reading, or people who were already readers just read more and more. So it ended up being a very good thing. If there's anything good that can come out of that time, it was a very good thing in reaffirming that, you know, publishing is still very much around, and people
Right.
want.
I think that the truth is that most people in this world don't read, you know, they never did, they never will, but then it's not a trend, you know, like I think there's just people who do read and they always will read. So that's our core audience. And then I think we grow and swell. Someone once told me the phrase of it, a book that can act as a tent pole, which I think is a really interesting phrase. So like when a book like Harry Potter comes out, or even some of these like tell-all political books that have come out over the past few years, like people will come into the bookstore for that. And that you will see like a overall increase in reading when something like an event like that occurs.
Right. That makes sense.
But in general, I think there's a steady population of people who do read and always will read, and they're not really being taken away by all the other forms of media that exist.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I really quickly want to mention, if you guys have questions, if there's things you've been curious about, we might hit on some of them in this discussion, but if you have questions, please do leave them in the comments. I'll be going ahead and checking to see what comes through. But I think maybe starting from very simple, what happens when an author reaches out to you and says, hey, I have this book that I would like to try to see if I can have you represent it and get it published. Would you like to see a manuscript? Can you walk me through the steps in the process that typically happens when you're approached?
Right. So, I mean, every agent these days seems to have some sort of like website portal, or I don't really know actually, but I do anyway. So when you go to my website, if you want to submit, there's a portal and you have to fill out like a brief questionnaire. And then you have to send a synopsis in the first several chapters and a cover letter. Those are all the things that you need. And to me, the most important part is the questionnaire is very important because that's the first, the first gateway. So oftentimes I'll look at that, and many times people submit into genres that I don't represent, like poetry or high fantasy, or like self-help or something. I just don't really work on those kind of books. So I can pass on those projects just based on knowing what the project is. And then if it makes it past the first round of like, yes, I do represent this book, yes, this does sound interesting, then I open up the cover letter. So that's the next most important thing that I would say. And I think you just have to be, for the cover letter, the best advice is there's no like format that any one agent would really care about particularly. That used to be a question I got a lot at conferences, like, what format do you prefer? How many pages, how many words? And I'm like, nobody really cares. I don't care. But I just
when I was first starting out, all these writing advice books were like, it must be formatted in this way. And it's not the thing that matters as much as the content of that cover letter, the content of those other pieces of the submission.
I feel like the best thing you could do in your cover letter is give the agent a sense of like who you are as a person. And hopefully that is a nice person, someone that like you want to work with, if you're too stiff and formal, then I don't think that does you any favors. But if you're just like, hey, I wrote this, like, give me a ring back when you read it, like, that's not going to be right either. So you need to strike like what I think is the tone that is found in most correspondence in business these days, which is more of a casual, professional tone.
Right. That makes sense. So if the cover letter looks interesting to you, because I imagine just like it was when I was doing this, there's some information about what it is that they're submitting, what type of book it is, a little bit of a brief snippet of what the plot would be. If that looks good to you, what's the next step?
Then I look into the book itself, right? So I don't like to read the synopsis first. I just want to get right into the chapters. So I usually just, honestly, like I've done this for so many years that like I can tell if I'm a match for somebody's voice within a very few amount of pages, So you really need to focus on making your first few pages as good as they can be.
And what are you looking for in terms of a voice for you? Because I imagine that's really subjective. It's what you respond to, right?
I just want to be drawn into the story right away. And I also just want to like the style of writing, it's indelible. Like I really can't put my finger on it because I like all different kinds of styles of writing. I just want to feel immersed in the voice. I want to feel like the author has control of what they're doing, because it's not a good feeling as a reader to feel like the author isn't have you like in their hands in a comfortable way, you know? So whatever style you write in, that's fine, you know? It's just make sure to make sure that you have done your homework and edited it as much as you can and not over edited it. But I think I always tell my authors, like, it's truly so subjective that like if you're not having fun writing it and you don't enjoy reading it, then probably the other people who read it aren't going to enjoy it either.
I think that's a really good piece of advice long into your career also, because I've also found that if I'm struggling and I'm not enjoying the pages that I'm writing, something's wrong and I need to figure out what the something is and get back to the fun part. And it may be that I've just become completely bogged down in something that's not really necessary, whether it's an information dump or I'm like trying to physically get characters from one place to another place, and it's sort of it's all transition and I'm just stuck forever in this transition point. But I think, you know, if I can have that enjoyment, then it translates to the page, it translates to readers, and that's the response that you want, obviously, is somebody else to enjoy it as well. So it makes perfect sense that at the beginning stages of your career, you want that as well, to grab an agent's attention.
Right. And there are so many writing tricks. Like, you know, there's so many ways of writing in deep POV and using setting. And, you know, there's how to plot your book. There's so many texts that are so good at explaining this and workshops. But as an agent, I've never, ever been interested in really giving my writers like those kind of tips, you know,
Sure.
because I feel like that's something that you can do. Like, I don't want to teach the craft of writing. I feel like I'm coming at it like, hopefully, you know, all that stuff already. And then like now we're talking about more like voice and character, and those are the kind of things that I'm
Yeah.
more interested in working on with people.
And does the story that you're trying to tell come out in the page in a
Mhm,
way that makes sense with what you're trying to do? If
mhm,
that
mhm.
if
Those
that
tips definitely work, like talking about like how you should structure the novel, where the climax should be. Those I definitely recommend making yourself aware of those things, you know. But once you have a general awareness, then you have to go into the story itself and see what the characters are trying to do.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot
Mhm.
of sense. We have a question here from Jin. Is the rule still that you can only submit to one agent at a time? If so, how long do you have to wait until you give up and move on to another potential agent?
That's a great question. I've never really thought about that, but yes, you should only submit to one agent at a time. And I think a month or two is plenty to wait
I
to submit
found
to
when I
another
was,
agent.
it was again, it was earlier days, so I'm always cautious in sharing anything that is, you know, old information. But my experience was very much I created a power ranking of agents, and you were at the top. And I basically went through and I sent out query letters, and when I would not hear back from somebody, or when some people are in fact, I found these old emails. I think I did two or three at the same time when I was doing it, because that was the advice I had been given. And some people were very fast. You know, this is not for me. My list is full. I don't think we have anything. You know, I don't think this is quite the right project for me. And then there were the longer term ones where people had, you know, read the chapters and things like that. And then there were people who reached back out and said, I really liked what you wrote. Can you send me more? So I imagine if you find something where you think these early chapters are great, I want to read more of it, then you're reaching out to the author and asking them to submit
Yeah.
more.
Oh, yes. And I should clarify when you asked, like, can I submit to more than one agent? Yes. I thought you meant within the agency.
Oh, within the
I was
agency.
just misunderstanding that question. So, yes, definitely submit to many, many agents, but only submit to one agent per agency. But if you don't hear back in a month or two, I think it's safe to try another agent at that agency.
Sure, that makes
That is
sense.
all I meant. Sorry, I don't want to scare people to think they only
No,
can
no,
try
no.
one agent at a time.
And I know, you know, when somebody once asked me, should I, like, I have a list of 45 people, should I submit to all 45? And I said, I wouldn't do that, because my understanding is that generally the rule is if it's a straight rejection, then, you know, you really can't resubmit with that book unless there are major, major changes that you're making in the editorial process as you're going through, as you're doing your own editing. Maybe you're, you know, getting critiques from somebody. So if there's significant changes, that's one thing. So you don't necessarily want to submit to everybody and then realize that if agents are giving you feedback, it's all the same feedback about the same thing, where you could have maybe fixed that and then maybe sent out a stronger submission in the future.
And I do that with submissions to publishers too. I never submit to like every single possible publisher right off the bat.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So
Mostly if even if I know the book is going to sell for sure, because I don't think that's a very good thing to do. Like I like to have a targeted submission, but even if I don't know if it's going to sell, I want to have a more narrow submission. So if there's changes, then we have other publishers to try.
right. So it's like having a short list in your back pocket, and then you can always go to other people on that list if it's not quite right for some people who you've initially sent to. So you find a manuscript you really love, you get those extra pages from somebody, you think this is great, and then what happens next?
Well, if I love the pages, like you said, I would reach out to them and say, please like send me the rest of your book so I can read it. And then at that point, I'll read it. And then, if it's something that I don't feel like I can sell, even if it's wonderful, then I will pass on it. And then if I feel like it's something I can sell, then usually, I will reach out to the, author, start with like, I love your book. I never just cold call people these days because no one will pick up. So, I'll say like, would you like, I love your book. I'd love to talk to you about possible representation. And usually I won't say like, I'd love to offer you representation because I feel like the more older I get and the more cautious I get, I feel like we want to make sure that we like each other first,
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that because you emailed me and asked me if I was available for a phone call. And then we talked. I was at work, so I ran upstairs and where nobody was sitting and took the phone call when I had a break. And so we chatted, and then we actually, because we were both living in the New York City area, the tri-state area, we were actually able to meet, and we signed the contract literally sitting over breakfast.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because I had a chance to preview the contract and all of that. But I think for me, that was really important because I wanted to make sure that you were the right fit for me and I was the right fit for you, and our sort of attitudes towards things were the same. Our working style was similar, because I think that's, you hope that you have one agent who you can grow together and you can grow your career together. And there's a lot of trust that gets placed in that because you go out and you represent me in the publishing world. And you also advise me on a lot of things as well. It's not just looking at contracts. It is so much more than that.
Well, especially as I get more advanced in my career. And I've been so lucky to work with authors like you for 10 years or other authors that have been, at my agency for a really long time. I realized like, it's almost like a marriage, it's like, it's extremely sensitive and valuable. And, it's funny because I appreciate what I have so much that it's like hard for me to start that new with somebody, I think that's one of the challenges that I've had as I've gotten older in my career, is like what didn't feel so immense to me at the beginning is now like extreme. Like I just don't take on very many new clients because it's like a huge, once I decide you're mine, like, that's it. Like, I don't ever want my clients to leave. I want to stick with them for life. And that's like a big thing,
It is. Well, and it's funny. I was just thinking, you've met my family over video chat. You've met my partner over video chat. You always ask after him. He always asks after you. You are absolutely a big part of my life, not just my career, but my personal life as well. Yeah. And it's just one of those things where I think maybe I didn't understand that fully and I got very lucky in getting the right agent for me, but I don't think I really understood that fully, because I think people, when they spoke about agents, they spoke about it in a very transactional sort of way, in a sort of client agent sort of way, but it is more than that. And that's really intangible. And I think difficult to replicate with somebody who you don't have that connection with.
And I'm not sure all agents see it that way, but like as my career progressed, like that's the way I like it. And that's the way I'm going to keep it. Like just every relationship is like, I pour a lot of my heart into it and I take it really seriously. And it is extremely serious because, are you frozen, Julia? You are frozen.
We might have lost Emily here. We might have lost me.
Okay. Oh yeah. I lost you. You lost me. Yeah. No, I was just saying that like, it's extremely, serious who you take on as an agent, because you might think like, I haven't sold my book yet, but then you sell it and it sells really well and it's a big deal. And, it's not only your book, it's like how you earn your money. It's how your life is structured. So it's a massively huge deal who is your partner in all of that,
No, definitely. So in the happy instance where you find somebody who you do connect with and you both want to work together and you sign a contract and you have this book that hasn't been published yet, what are your next steps in terms of trying to find that book a home?
Well, I mean, a lot of times, I think this happened with you, like we'll work on some revisions,
Mhm.
right away. Right. And sometimes in the course of the revisions, like I never just take on an author because I love their book. I take on an author because I think they have a bright career ahead of them, you know? So in some cases, we don't even end up selling that book that brought us together.
Which was
So,
me.
yeah,
In fact, I
right.
was just thinking, I'm sure I have it on a hard drive somewhere. I'm not 100% sure it's on my current laptop, actually. But it lives somewhere in the world.
That
Uh,
happens far more than you would think with my clients. Like the book that they come to me with is not the book that we end up
mhm.
selling, because I can say to them, like, I see something really special in your writing, but right now, this kind of book is selling. Are you open to writing this kind of book?
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that because when we connected in 2012, um, it was a very, very different market for what I was writing at the time, which was historical romance rather than historical fiction.
Mhm.
So I started out in romance, as some people know, and I had always read romance, really loved it, and specifically Regency romance. And so I really wanted to write sort of Regency Victorian historical romance, and the market was having none of it. The market wanted 50 Shades of Grey, and that was not what I was writing. And so we had to make a decision, do I go in the direction of writing to what the market wants right now, or do I continue to sort of figure out what might be the right place for me eventually? And eventually we ended up selling a historical romance series, which was great, but it did take time because in my case, you and I kind of both agreed that maybe that sort of 50 Shades erotic romance wasn't quite right for me. It was great for other people, wasn't right for
It
me.
had to be a
And
discussion though, because it was so popular at the time,
yeah, it did. And
Yeah.
I seriously thought about it. I really thought, is this something that I want to write? And which direction do I want my career to go? And I think, it's like a sliding doors parallel worlds moment. There's absolutely a parallel world where we did that and it sold, and there's a whole different career that is
Mhm.
that is my career in that alternate universe. But in my case, I think I wrote another book for you that we've never talked about again because it was really not good. And then I started pitching you some ideas, and eventually we ended up on the Governess series, which is the historical romance series that we did end up selling. And that really, from there, is how my career started to grow and build. And it took a few years, it really took some time. And so I always like to remind people who are writing and who are trying to get published that, the overnight success story often has a lot of years that you just don't see in the background, and knowing that this is not just my story but a lot of clients that you've had, it takes some time to find the right book and the right publisher, I think is also always a good thing to mention.
Yeah. And I just would like to say again that, like, if you're a writer and that first project doesn't sell, you let that project go and you
Yeah.
and you write another project, because
And we
that's what
even
really being a writer is about.
Yeah, and we even had an instance where I wrote something and we got the same feedback back. It's, really like her, not quite right for us. And then we ended up turning around and selling that on to my publisher once I had a publisher. So sometimes those books come back and
Mhm.
have a new life.
Yeah. So just put it in your back shelf. You're not throwing it away. You're just going to set it aside,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Mhm.
typically, I think when we've discussed, where would be a good home for a book, we've often discussed, a short list. And, what's our approach with this? What do you always ask me sort of, what would you like this book to be? I try to tell you a bit about what I have in my head that hasn't gotten down on paper yet, because at this point I'm usually selling synopses rather than fully written books, which I
Mhm.
think is a surprise to some people. But usually we have an idea of who is looking for what in the market, and how do you come up with that short list? How do you know what these editors are looking for?
Well, back in the day, like the olden days, one of my best parts of my job was going out to lunch, and I did that like at least once a week. And alas, I don't do that
Publishing
anymore.
lunches is famous.
I do have one tomorrow, which I'm very excited about.
Oh,
But they're far and few between, and we do a lot of Zooms now, which is fine. But it's not. Being an agent is fabulous because editors take you out to lunch, and it's so much fun. And you just sit there talking about books and getting to know each other. And it's really, really fun. And it's also an important part of the job because then I say like, well, I know so and like I know they love dogs because we looked at 10 pictures of their dogs during lunch, and I have this book about dogs. It's going to be perfect for them, and then we end up really making good matches that way. Or I know they're from Ohio, and oh my gosh, this book is set in Ohio, and or they're really obsessed with Greek mythology, whatever it is. Like I get to know them, and that is
Yeah.
like my job, and that's their job to get to know me so that I can send them an appropriate project.
So there's a lot of relationship building that happens behind the
Mhm.
scenes to make sure that an author and a book are the best fit that they could be for that short list of
And
publishers.
that's why it's good to, I mean, obviously new agents, deserve a chance, but it is helpful to have an agent who has had that chance to do some relationship building because it is so hard to get an editor to pay attention to your book. But if the editor considers you a friend, they're going to read it a lot more quickly. And
Yeah.
that's just unfortunately the way publishing goes.
I think a lot of businesses are like that. It's tough to
Mhm.
break in, but once you're able to break in either through internships or sort of being somebody's assistant or whatever that is, that allows you to make some of those connections yourself and start building your list. I would imagine.
Mine is just 20 years of lunches. Just kidding.
20 years of lunches. There you go.
And that's a pretty good thing, right? Just I
Exactly.
mean, this and like being a writer, being an agent requires a lot of perseverance because in the first few years of being an agent, oh my gosh, I got so many rejections. It was really, really hard. And it wasn't because my projects were bad. It was like they were selling to the people that they knew, and they were buying from the people that they knew, or projects that felt like a safer bet, or.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always difficult, I think, to explain to people how much of publishing can often be, what feels right to somebody and who do you know? And I think, there have been a lot of discussions in publishing around whether that's a good thing or a bad thing and, diversity and inclusion and things like that. But I think especially when you're having to approach somebody and then they're having to go off and advocate for your book at a, editorial meeting with their publisher, whoever it is that's signing off on them being allowed to actually offer a book deal for that book, it can be a tricky balance, I would imagine.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like it's so important in terms of diversity and inclusion is to like have a lot of diversity at the assistant level in publishing,
Absolutely. Yeah.
because I feel like it's really helpful to have gone through the whole process, and to have good support. And I think everyone in publishing, authors, and I know you do this so well, Julia, but authors, agents, editors, everybody, like we all need to support the younger generation. It's absolutely essential that we have good people in every one of those fields, like coming up behind us.
No, I think so. And I think I remember not knowing anything about anything. And I remember not knowing anybody in publishing also. And that felt very lonely. And it also felt very much like I didn't even know what to ask people because I'd never gone through the process. And I feel like I'm still now, occasionally I'll run into something and I'll message an author friend and be like, have you ever experienced this before? Or do you know this person? Have you worked with this person? And that alone, being able to reach out to somebody who might be able to give you an answer is so, so helpful. Because I think as an author, often it can feel very lonely and isolated because you sit at your desk in front of your laptop for most people. I know a few people who still longhand write their books, but you are by yourself and you're in your head with made up characters, and that can sometimes feel very lonely. So you need to have those people around you to sort of help you and support you.
Well, at least for me, you think, oh, publishing is such a glamorous industry. And once I meet the people, they're going to be so unapproachable and scary. But I found that absolutely not to be the case. Like sometimes I look at the colleagues around me and I think, like, these are all such wonderful people. And like, we are basically the publishing industry. Isn't that wonderful?
A bunch of
That's a
book
good feeling. What?
nerds. A bunch of book nerds.
Yeah, that's all we are. We're not like, Vogue magazine or whatever. And like, we're just like, I think people who choose to work in the publishing industry are generally people who just really love to read, which are people that I personally have a lot in common with and have fit in with really well over my career.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, I think a lot of readers are aware that there is a contract process that happens, and there's a business deal that gets done when a book goes from being a manuscript to actually getting into the editorial process. But when it comes to situations where you've sold a book, you said you don't just walk away. You're not a real estate agent in that regard, where the sale is done and you don't have any other connection with it. So what is it that you are stepping in to do sometimes once a book has already found a home?
Well, I mean, usually there's like a meeting between the editor and the author to like connect and to get to know each other. I always join that meeting, as
Yeah.
so just to make sure. And then once everybody seems to be getting along well and things are going well, I do like to step back in general and let the editor and the author do their editorial process, like more or less without me, because I don't think you can have like too many cooks in the kitchen when it comes to like the writing of the book,
Oh,
I always read the book if the author wants me to. Not always. Some authors don't want me to, but I usually read the book after it's finished and offer my 2 cents, and then, but usually let the editor do the bulk of the editing. And
right.
then I sort of step back in for kind of keeping a closer eye on the publicity and the marketing efforts, even though, just to clarify, like, and I know everybody, because my client knows this, like, I'm not a publicist or a marketing director. Like, they're like, no, you're my agent, like, publicize this book for me. I'm like, no, I know that sounds really weird, but like, that's not actually my
Right.
job, you know?
Right.
And I would never want to try to do that for you because I don't know how, I mean,
Yeah.
I think I picked up a lot of tips over the years and I have an idea of how I would want to do
Yes.
it now, but it's not.
There are departments at publishers for publicity and marketing. They have a very specialized base of knowledge. And I think both you and I have a lot of knowledge that, as you say, you've picked up over the years, but it's not the same as being in that job every single day.
Right. And like publicity, like they just have to have a lot of contacts. Like I have to have a lot of editorial contacts. They have to have a lot of contacts at magazines and newspapers and news outlets, et cetera, et cetera. And marketing is like, it's a lot about like money and placement and, like stuff that I just have never like hands-on done myself. But I do like to keep an eye out for the author and monitor that and make sure everything's going well. And then of course there's like the cover and there's countless little minute details that go into publishing a book, and of course my main job is to keep track of like, okay, you finished the book, I want to make sure you get paid, where I gotta get the money,
It's a big part of it.
Agent's job really is about making sure an author gets paid. So I consider that not the most glamorous part of my job, but the most important part of my job.
I agree. It's very, very important. And I'm very glad you do it very well.
And then as the books and the years progress, you get authors get royalty statements. Either they don't have money because they haven't earned back their advance, or they do have money. And either way, it's my job to review those statements. And I consider that also an incredibly unglamorous, but very extremely important part of my job.
I am, again, one of those things where you don't know until you know. I never read a royalty statement before because, why would I have? Those are not generally publicly available for people to look up.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I got it, I think I got on the phone with you and I was like, right, I don't understand any of this.
There's certain moments in my career that I remember like very specifically, and like going over that first royalty statement with you is like definitely one of those moments. I remember where I was sitting, what I was doing.
It's funny, the first substantial royalty statement that was not, just a couple bucks, like pizza money. You called me while I was on the phone with a video call with a couple of friends. So I actually
remember that too.
Yeah, because I knew that if you called me, probably something was going on and I should take that call. So I muted it and muted my friends and I was taking the call with you. And I think I started almost crying on the phone.
It was pretty great.
It was, if you think about it, sort of the moment where you go from not selling a book for a long time, it's sort of getting a lot of rejections and then finally getting a foot in the door and then finally getting to a point where, for me at least, my goal, and I told you this on the first phone call that we ever had, was that I wanted to write full time. And it took almost 10 years, but we did it. And, getting to that point where there was a royalty statement, and a royalty statement you wanted to walk me through and explain what was going on, was really, really important. It was significant. And I at the time, I didn't cry very often. Now I do. But talk about getting older. One of my friends has a theory that as you get older, you cry more. So for what it's worth, but I really found that was a really big, significant moment. So there have been a couple of big moments in my career that you have been right there for. So
I know that was it's really special. Like, honestly, like as an agent, I feel just as excited when something wonderful happens to my client, which is such an incredible honor to be able to be part of these big moments of people's lives, you know?
well, and like we said before, people in my family, you're a big part of my life, and that's where that again, getting that bond right, getting that fit right, I think is so important.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's a wonderful, it's a blessing of life, really, truly.
So we have a lot of historical fiction readers for obvious reasons, because I've been writing historical fiction and interviewing historical fiction authors for this. So one of the questions that we get a lot in these discussions is, what do you think is happening with historical fiction right now, and specifically World War II? Because I think people are really interested in how significant World War II has been to the historical fiction genre these last few years. Do you see things changing for it, or do you think World War II books are very much here to stay?
I do not think it is going to change anytime soon, for sure. I feel like we're just getting into the more turbulent our own history becomes, the more we turn back to a time when we knew we knew good and evil, we knew right and wrong. That's World War II, you know? And,
Interesting.
and
There's
I
some,
think
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm saying, I also just feel like a lot of forces are at work in the world right now that people are eager to see, like, how did that all play out, like back then, as we face similar challenges.
Well, I know it's cliche, but history really is cyclical and, repeats itself. And so I think often the looking to the past is trying to understand both what happened then, but also how that relates to what we're doing now. And also understand how very normal, ordinary people dealt with these
Right.
significant
Yes.
life-changing things that
Very
were
good.
happening. And I know one of the things that's been really interesting, especially with books like The Last Garden in England, or, you guys haven't read this yet. Emily and I have read it. The Lost English Girl that's coming out in March is one of the things that, I'm trying to do is ask really big questions around, what would you do if you were in this situation, and how would you behave? And, how do you see this connecting into your life now, even if you're not, a woman whose home's been requisitioned for a convalescent hospital, or in the case of The Lost English Girl, a woman who has to send her child away for evacuation during the war. And I think that some of those questions are really meaty and really difficult and have lots of shades of gray in them. So it means that you can read one book and have a really strong response to it. You can read another book and, find that your opinions are slightly different. And I think that's really interesting and engaging as a reader.
And I do think we're like thrust more and more into these moments where we are living in history. And so I think historical fiction is more helpful even than contemporary fiction in that way, because you're like, wow, these people did a really big thing that I can't imagine myself doing, but yet they did it.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I do think it's interesting talking to authors and people who review books. I do think that there is a lot of interest in stories that haven't yet been told from World War II. And maybe that's the slight differentiation, finding those things that still, those voices that still need to be brought to light, or more little known stories, things that people just haven't encountered necessarily in a book yet. I think there's always an interest in
Yeah.
what's new.
Said, I do feel like every book has its own set of characters, its
Yeah,
own story. So even if you've read about a nurse living in London 100 times, like, it's still a different nurse and a different perspective,
that's
So
very true.
yeah.
Absolutely. Every author brings a different perspective as well, because of course, a book that I write is going to be different than a book that somebody else writes around the same subject.
Exactly. So I don't think anyone needs to worry too much about repeating themselves, because no one can write your book, and no one can meet your characters except for you. And I think, if people are drawn more than to the topic, to the characters. you know.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I know when we were sort of initially talking about The Lost English Girl and I was heavily in through developmental edits and drafts, I found out that Patty Callahan Henry and Hazel Gaynor were also writing about evacuated children. And the three of us kind of talked to each other and went, this is crazy. We haven't seen an evacuated child story for ages. What are you writing about? And I said, well, I'm writing about this. What are you writing about? Completely different stories. So, you could read any of those books and have a completely different experience as a reader, but still be interested in the topic. And I think, it's one of those things where, Patty's story is going to be different than Hazel's story is going to be different than my story.
I know, it's kind of awesome, isn't it? Really?
It
Like
is.
just the diversity of the human experience. And you can see that a little bit more when you see books that have sort of the same general topic.
Absolutely. We keep joking that we need to do a panel together when everybody's book is
Oh,
out.
I'm really hoping you do. I'm sincerely
We
hoping.
should. We really should.
Yeah. Or
Definitely.
even like a little, I mean, you live in England, but it would be fun to do like a little mini tour together even.
It would. Yeah, it really would.
It's
Well,
such a unique and awesome set of circumstances that you're all writing about similar topic.
it is, and very different things within those topics. So yeah, I think
You
it's
can make something of that, in my opinion.
yeah,
This is like
absolutely
the amateur marketing person in me coming out here.
right.
Publicity person.
What can we do here? It's
Yeah.
talking in the background, I'm sure.
Yeah.
When it comes to other genres, what else do you represent?
I still represent romance, even though it's a harder genre.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of that's turned into like small town, sweeter stories. Romance, ironically, in the traditional publishing world, is like not very racy these days.
Oh, interesting. That's
Yeah.
really become more of an independently published thing.
So if you're talking romance, you're talking more like a sweet beach town in
Okay.
Nantucket or something like that, more like Elin Hildebrand style, which is so much fun. I never ever get tired of reading books like that, knitting and tea, and that's me. So I love those books. And I also represent
I'm knitting right here. So,
yes,
so
exactly. Bring on the knitting. I have my knitting right over there. So yeah, lots of historical fiction, contemporary. I'm doing more like doing a little bit of thrillers, contemporary fiction in the adult space. And then in young adult, I also do like a little, like some paranormal, some contemporary. I love YA. I tend towards the like edgier, more edging right into like the adult space,
right.
That's kind of
So
a
little bit older characters, more mature topics. Yeah, that makes
That's really where my career is focused, is like the older YA and then adult.
Yeah. We had a question about how many clients roughly you represent and whether that's pretty average for the industry or whether that's kind of high or low.
Gosh, I mean, one thing I would say about other agents is like, and it's not the way the author should behave, but like, I just do my own thing and I don't really know about other agents because
right.
It's kind of been one of my guiding philosophies in life. It's like, I have a vision of how I want to do it. It's working out, and I'm not going to like concern myself too much with other people. And I feel like even with writing, like you can befriend people and do like joint, panels and stuff like that. But you do have to kind of like, it's just such a competitive industry, and it's so, you don't want to get carried away with like thinking about what other people are doing. So what works for me is just doing it the way that works best for me.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I've always taken a rising tide lifts all boats approach, and so feel very strongly about promoting other people's books and doing mentorship and all of that. But when it comes to writing advice, and really when it comes to when you get into the weeds of PR and marketing, some of it's great, but some you need to take with a grain of salt. I think if you're an author, especially if you're just starting out, and figure out what makes sense for you and what makes sense for your career. And that was a bit of advice that you gave me very early on that has been really a big guiding light for me, is that what somebody's doing over here could be great for me if I sit down and think about it, and but it may not be the right fit, and so it really needs to make sense with what I'm interested in.
Or you could get burned out too. If you end up doing something that's not a good fit for you, you're gonna
absolutely. Yeah.
But that said, I should say I do co-agent. I've been co-agenting like more projects these days, so I've had an opportunity to work with some incredible agents who are so kind, and I just love working with them, and it's been a wonderful experience. So I do, and it's been like, it's almost eerie because I don't connect that much with other agents. So when I hear them like saying words that like come out of my mouth, I'm like, you're doing the same thing I'm doing, like over there. That's kind of cool, you know?
And when you say co-agenting, is that where you've put two authors together to co-write a book so they each have their own representation? Okay.
Yes, yes. And so I'm like, this is my advice. And they're like, I'd say the same. Or they'll say something and I'll say, I'd say the same. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool that like we're kind of like have these parallel, thought processes going on, So
Definitely.
but I'd say like I probably actually have, if I could pull up my client list, I have about 50 clients, but like not all of them are active. So
Right.
maybe like 30 active clients, perhaps. Yeah. And that's right for me. But some people have less, some people have more. But
Yeah.
I really like to dive deep with my clients. So I don't want to have too many clients.
Yeah, especially when we're around deal time or, talking about developing a pitch, things like that. We spend a lot of time talking to each other, more than I think people would expect.
Mhm.
It's not just I send you something and you say great and you go off with it. It's much more involved than that. And I imagine you can only spread yourself so thin when it comes to offering that level of attention to clients
Yeah.
at some
And it
point.
just, as I get older, like I also just see the world in a different way. And I think everyone has because of COVID, and they're like, I want to do what I'm
Yeah.
doing the best I can. I want to feel like calm at the end of the day that I know I've accomplished everything I need to accomplish. And so I really need to limit like what I'm doing,
Yeah.
not like a book selling factory, like
Yeah, no, you need to take care of yourself as
or
well.
artisan is an artisan job, so like every book is like really special and I just don't want to have too many, but I don't think that is the way a lot of agents think. So I would say that that is different for me.
Yeah, and again, talking about fit when
Mhm.
it comes to your clients, you have to think about whether you want that type of experience or a different experience.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. You might just want more of like a more impersonal, like, here's the places we're going to sell. We sold it. Like you're on, let's get this going. Let's do this. Let's do that. That's also a very legitimate approach,
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I always love talking to you, and we always talk more than we expect that we're going to. But I want to make sure that I have plenty of time to ask you about some books that you would recommend, either from your list or things that you've been reading and enjoying, because I know you're also a really big reader and you're always recommending books to me, which is really a wonderful, wonderful thing. I love a reading recommendation.
Well, I feel the same way about you, I mean, it is funny because I'm an agent and I read for work, but I also, like you said, do read like heavily for fun as well. So
Yes.
starting with my fun suggestions, I just have to throw out this one book that I just read that I loved so much. It's called Saffron and Love. I don't know if you've heard of it,
No, I
but
don't think
it's
I
like
do.
this tiny little novella, really. It's not even a novel. And it's about a woman. I think you would love it. She befriends this, she writes a letter to a person who writes like a column in a newspaper about like her life in like rural Oregon on the
Oh,
coast. She's like, I love your letter. It's so evocative. She's from LA. And she's like, I'm sending you this saffron that I recently got on my travels. And then the woman writes back and they have this whole entire like relationship surrounding, like it takes place in the 60s. So they don't have as many experiences with like food like saffron.
right.
She's like, you should try cooking with garlic. It's so delicious. And it just opens up both of their minds and they like become more worldly and more like less intolerant of other types of people. And it just like completely transforms them. Just this saffron. It's an amazing story. I loved it.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Just this cute
Wonderful.
little story. And for a book from my own agency, I would like to throw out to my author, Haley Krischer. I don't know if you know her, but
I
her
don't think.
wonderful book that came out about a year ago just came out in paperback called The Fallen Girls. And it's a young adult novel. And it is I like to call if every book should be able to be summed up in a sentence, and hers would be a cheerleader murder mystery.
Oh, interesting.
So, I mean, what more could you want, really, right? So it's about it's a kind of like a modern day retelling of the Heathers.
Oh,
There's
sure.
three
Yeah.
girls named Chloe, and they sort of like rule the school in terms of cheerleading. And this other girl is like, I kind of want to be a cheerleader. And then she befriends the three Chloes and has to sort of part ways or like have a severing of ties with like her previous best friend. And they're
Okay.
still friends, but like the other girl's not going to be a cheerleader. So it's like, how do you grow up? How do you find what you love? And then in the midst of all of that, one of the cheerleaders dies.
Right. There's a murder mystery in the
One of
middle.
the Chloes is dead. So
We do love
you
a
have to
murder
figure out.
mystery in this
Yes.
client agent relationship. So
Yes. So it is quite a fun book and it's been optioned for film and I'm super
oh,
excited about it.
fantastic.
So if you're looking for a fun read, that also was very thought provoking about like growing up and fitting in and just, the culture that girls like cheerleaders are, their bodies are battered, they're bruised, like they don't get a lot of respect,
Physical
but
sport,
they're
yeah.
very physical. So it's just a lot about like what it's like to be a girl in America today, and how hard it is,
Oh,
so
that sounds great. I
yeah.
will. I do love a bit of YA crime, so I might very well pick that up. And I think that sounds like something my sister would enjoy as well.
Oh my gosh. Well, anything, you need on that front, you just let me know.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you sitting down and kind of walking people through a bit of a life of an agent and what it is that you do to make these wonderful books appear in the world.
Well, thank you. I'm so honored to be here and so happy to talk to you.
Thank you guys so much. If you are in Florida or you have family and friends in Florida, please stay
Absolutely.
safe.
Mhm.
We're obviously watching the news and hope everybody is okay. We will be back next month with another book club edition. So keep an eye out on the Facebook group and we'll have more information there. Until then, happy reading. And thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Bye.